This Prison Chronicles episode, I will profile MM member Jesse J.B. BOJORQUEZ and his journey into the Arizona prison system and ultimately his co-founding a prison gang named La Familia, which became the Mexican Mafia before a major rift caused a split amongst the group and leadership that caused a 40-year war from which two distinct factions emerged, which came to be labeled by the prison administration as the Old M and the New M. JB, or Chewy as he was also known, would emerge, at least in part, as the leader of the old faction. On December 23, 1969, Jesse J.B. BOJORQUEZ, originally from the East Side Phoenix neighborhood of the East Side 9th Street Gang, was sentenced to 4 years in prison for an assault with a deadly weapon he committed on November 22, 1969. And was released less than 2 years later on November 29, 1971. Upon his release, he was out for 6 days before being returned to custody for a theft charge. He was sentenced on March 24, 1972 to 2.5 years. After serving less than 1 year of that sentence, on October 8, 1972, JB and other inmates in the Arizona State Prison Central Unit in Florence, Arizona, refused to lock down. Officers negotiated with the inmates in order to get them to go back to their cells. At one point, it seemed that the inmates were in fact dispersing and headed to their cells. However, as other officers arrived on the scene, one of the inmates by the name of Freddie Del Vecchio pulled out a prison-made knife, a shank, and told the officers that he was not going to lock down, and if any officers attempted to approach him, he would kill 1 or 2 of them. As the officers retreated, Officer M.O. Ramirez became cornered in the stairway of the cell block. Inmate Del Vecchio started to fight with Officer Ramirez, stabbing him twice on his right side and 3 times on his left side. At this point, JB pulled out a metal homemade shank of his own and stabbed Officer Ramirez 5 more times. As another officer, Granville Montgomery, attempted to intercede on C.O. Ramirez's behalf, he was struck numerous times by JB and Freddie Del Vecchio. Both inmates were charged with assault with intent to commit murder of M.O. Ramirez and assault to commit murder on C.O. Granville Montgomery, and prisoner in possession of a deadly weapon. JB was given 15 years for each charge on top of his original sentence. On June 22, 1973, JB, along with other inmates including co-founder of the M, Roy Rodriguez, caused a disturbance in the cell block of Central Unit. According to inmate witnesses, JB and other inmates had planned this takeover for some time. On the day of the uprising, JB set his cell on fire by lighting his mattress and some clothing on fire in the middle of his cell. Officers Dell, Maury, and Theodore Buckley came and opened his cell to put out the fire. Buckley arrived with the fire hose while Maury opened JB's cell door. As soon as his door was opened, Jesse attacked them with what was described as a stick, locking Officer Maury and Buckley in his cell while he and other inmates let out other prisoners in the cell block from their cells. Under questioning, a witness testified that he saw JB and Roy leading Officer Buckley with a hood over his head by the arm to the front of the cell block, and later Officer Buckley was found mortally wounded laying on the shower floor. An inmate that was originally charged with murder with JB and Roy testified that he watched JB stab Officer Buckley about 20 times. Later during the uprising, JB and Roy took Officer Maury from the cell he was locked in, and after Roy allegedly hit the officer, knocking him to the floor with the club, Jesse shouted that he, Officer Maury, would not beat him again and proceeded to stab him multiple times, killing him. After this uprising, Jesse J.B. BOJORQUEZ was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of prisoner in possession of a weapon, along with another inmate, while Roy Rodriguez was charged with assault by a prisoner serving a life term in prison. Both went to trial, but only JB was found guilty. Jesse, having been found guilty, was sentenced to 75 to 99 years for the weapons charge and concurrent life sentences for the 2 murder charges. Years later, at the opening of a new prison in Buckeye, Arizona called the Sam Lewis Complex, there were 2 yards named after these officers, Moore Unit, a level 4, and Buckley Unit, also a level 4. It was around this time that the Arizona prison system was being introduced to its first prison gang with the introduction of La Familia, a prison gang co-founded by Roy Rodriguez, Avelino Pasi Rodriguez, Fernando Wimpy Nunez, and Jesse J.B. Bojorquez, along with others that were in the system at the time. To get the full story on the beginnings of the Mexican Mafia in Arizona, watch my video named Birth of the Mexican Mafia. Later, on July 28, 1982, Jesse Bojorquez and his co-defendant in this case, Rudy Tuba Dominguez, were housed in an intensive custody cell block, CB6. Early in the afternoon, they were outside their cells doing cleanup chores when it became apparent to the guards that the chores were not being done. They were ordered to commence cleaning or to go back to their cells. They refused to do either. After some arguing, they were told they could stay out in the common area until the mandatory 3 o'clock count. At 3 o'clock, both again refused to re-enter their cells. They shouted obscenities at the guards and challenged the lieutenant in charge to send his dogs in. When verbal negotiations were unsuccessful, the lieutenant ordered 6 guards to don riot gear. As the door to the pod was opened, JB and Tuba pulled out shanks from their clothing and indiscriminately lunged at the incoming officers. 2 officers suffered stab wounds before JB and Tuba were subdued. They were both charged with 2 counts of dangerous assault by a prisoner and 1 count of possession of a deadly weapon by a prisoner. After a guilty verdict by jury trial, JB was sentenced to 2 life sentences for the 2 counts of dangerous assault by a prisoner and a 4-year term for the prisoner's possession of a deadly weapon. Tuba was also found guilty. Then a year later, he took part in the attack against Eloy Slo Lerma. Then in 1987, he himself was stabbed 47 times and killed in the Tucson complex Cimarron Yard by Ruben Slagjaw Melendez and Angel Crow Rivera. Jesse had several other disciplinary issues as well as multiple assaults within the system throughout these last 50 years inside. He was the catalyst to the Arizona Emmett War and a figure that caused a lot of dissension within the inmate population. Starting with just a 4.5-year sentence in the beginning and turning that into a life in prison sentence, his life can be looked at as an example of someone that could have done such little time, moved on, and maybe accomplished positive things in his life. Instead, he threw away his life and touched so many in negative ways throughout his life. As this video goes out, he is still in prison, locked down in SMU2 as an STG, Security Threat Group member, 23 hours a day, and has been basically in lockdown for the last 45 years. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate you. Hit that like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.